Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
This is Balance of Power here in Washington, where we're having to wonk out a little bit today in terms of procedure in the United States Senate as they try to move forward on this budget reconciliation package. The mechanism, of course, reconciliation, the one that Republicans are relying on to make sure that they can pass the president's legislative agenda only on a party line vote. No Democrats required. The problem is, if you want to use that process, the elements of the package need to pass muster with the Senate Parliamentarian. And some of it, Elizabeth MacDonough, said Parliamentarian, ruled today, Joe, does not indeed pass her test, at least at this time.
That's right. The bird bath is happening as we speak. The bird droppings are piling up, and one of them here is, to your point, blowing a pretty big hole in this bill. We are doing a deep wonk out today. You have to do this to understand what we're talking about, and looking forward to that. There's no one else we'd wonk out with other than Bill Hoagland. But first, we want to get to Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, who has the latest on these changes to the bill and what it might mean for the timeline. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Joe. So the Senate Parliamentarian ruled that the provision lowering the Medicaid provider tax doesn't comply with the rules required for reconciliation that Kaylee was just laying out there. Now, the Senate plan would have lowered the Medicaid provider tax over time to 3.5% for those states that did expand coverage under the Affordable Care Act. Essentially, according to that plan, that would have meant less federal matching funds for these states. So on one hand, this is considered to be perhaps a political win in that it takes off the table one of the most politically fraught issues that Senate Republicans were dealing with. In fact, many of the Republicans had raised concerns about what lowering the provider tax would mean, in particular for rural hospitals that utilize it to essentially up their funding. But on the other hand, it means less cost savings to the tune of $250 billion when you combine it with some of the other health care provisions that have been stripped out of this bill as part of the bird bath process. Now, we are still waiting on some additional details and clarity from the Senate Parliamentarian on why this provision in particular does not meet that threshold, that level for reconciliation, since we know that any provision in this bill will have to deal with budgetary matters. But at the end of the day, Joe and Kaylee, sources tell us that Republicans might try to rewrite this provision in some way to make sure that it does get through. But that could ultimately take time and delay the timeline to get this done by July 4th.
It's a perfect outline from Tyler Kendall. Thank you so much, Tyler. And the idea of the changes to the provider tax, to give you a sense of how many Republicans, including Democrats, were outraged by this idea, many of them from rural districts where local hospitals and nursing homes were set to close. We asked Congresswoman Erin Houchin about this, Republican from Indiana, just last evening on the late edition of Balance of Power. Here's what she said.
I'm going to hear from my hospitals back home. They're not happy with the Senate proposed version of this bill. We've heard from them loud and clear. We heard from them on the House side. This is a funding mechanism that keeps our rural hospitals alive. So whether we like the mechanism or not, we do have to give something in return or something in its place, and we're not ready to do that yet. So I think that what the Senate is doing goes too far. I'd like to see them dial it back to the House version.
The House version, of course, was a freezing of the provider tax level, whereas the Senate is looking to actually reduce it. But again, the parliamentarian says that Senate plan, as it stands right now, is not going to fly. And for more, Bill Hoagland, Senior Vice President at the Bipartisan Policy Center, is joining us here in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Bill, the operative words really are as currently written. This cannot fit into the reconciliation process. Do you have a sense of what maybe it is the parliamentarian is identifying does not work and how it could be tweaked in order for it to pass muster?
Let me first address something that's we're wonky here this afternoon, as you say. The parliamentarian does not rule.
Okay.
The chair of the Senate, who's sitting in the chair, she advises the chair. Mm-hmm. So first of all, there's a real concern about the parliamentarian's ruling. She's not ruling. She is advising who's sitting in the chair. The chair can accept the advice or not accept the advice, which is important. point.
Thank you.
And I just want to make that clear. In terms of, I don't know.
That's news to most people. We hear about the parliamentarian ruling all day long. You've got senators calling for her firing today, Bill, so that's a pretty important detail.
I think that's so unfortunate. She is a career person. She's not political. She's just abiding by the law, and she is carrying out her responsibilities effectively. Reconciliation has become something that's much more than what it used to be. And people are using it for things that was never intended. This is supposed to be a budget act. Now, in terms of the provider tax, I don't know the specifics. I can tell you that I think we had a provision earlier this week that was that she said violated the Byrd rule, had to do with the SNAP program and a state match. It was a simple fix. It was a date. I don't know exactly what it is that's creating the current problem, but I do have a feeling that it's probably something that's fixable, because this does save something like $280 billion, $250 billion over the next 10 years. So I just want to make it clear that this is, I think we're rushing to judgment here. I think the staff now understand there may be some tweaks they have to make in the legislation. It may be greater than that. I don't know. But I don't want to put all this burden that the parliamentarian has ruled.
Sure.
She is advising.
Well, I think the reason some people view this as being potentially something more definitive is because, by and large, the signal from Republican leadership to this point has been, we will abide by the guidance of the parliamentarian. Do you think if they cannot fix it, there's a chance that they actually decide to ignore her advice?
Well, exactly. Now, what happens is she tells the chair, this particular provision violates the Byrd rule. A point of order is well taken. At that particular point, the chair, who's sitting in the chair, that could be the vice president of the United States, could say, no, I don't think so. And I'm not going to rule that it violates it. Now, at that point, we're wonky. At that point, somebody can stand up, I question the ruling of the chair. And at that point, it would require 60 votes to overturn the ruling of the chair. So the chair can make the final decision, and it would require 60 votes to overturn the chair. So it's possible that they could say, listen, we're going to roll the dice, and we're not going to fire the parliamentarian. We're simply going to raise the point of order and waive the point of order if it comes to that point.
So it sounds like Senator Tuberville should be calling for the firing of the chair, if anyone in this particular case, which I guess is not a very realistic idea. But so the idea, though, that this goes back to the drawing board, it can be rewritten in a way that may satisfy the parliamentarian.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I have a feeling this does have a budgetary consequence, clearly, $250 billion. It does have a budgetary consequence.
Yes.
And so I think it meets that test. There must be something else in it. May be a date. It may be something. It's very restrictive. But I think this is something that probably can be fixed by the staff. I don't know. I'm a bit fair about it. I don't know what specifically it was that created the point of her concern that it violates the Byrd rule.
So we have a question of if it can be fixed, also a question of on what timeline, knowing that the Senate wanted to have a vote-a-rama this weekend, start the recess, come Monday, give it to the House, hope this thing is all said and done, signed by the president July 4th. What does that timeline look like now in your mind, Bill?
I've been one of the more pessimistic ones about this. I think the July 4th deadline is kind of somewhat arbitrary in terms of we don't have to have this finished. And I think they can. I'm certain that's what the president wants, is to have it on his desk, but that requires getting it out of the Senate, and they're changing it, so it'll have to go back to the House. The House will have to be called back from recess next week to vote on it, to get it there by the 4th of July. There's still a lot of work to be done. It seems like you should slow down, take your time, do it right, and get the votes. Right now, I don't think they have the votes for what's in the Senate, let alone maybe what would be in the House. So it's going to take a little time here to still work this out. So I'm the one who probably will miss on this, because, boy, there's a lot of pressure to get it done by the 4th. But I think that's a little bit too ambitious of a schedule right now.
We always learn something when we talk to Bill Hoagland.
Indeed.
Really appreciate this, Bill, a tempering voice and a bit of a reality check, right, to some of the headlines that we've been hearing with the Bipartisan Policy Center. Bill Hoagland with us in downtown Washington, D.C., just a few blocks from where Congressman Troy Downing is right now. The Republican from Montana's 2nd District joins us live from Capitol Hill for his view on all of this. And Congressman, it's great to have you back with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. You hear the concerns about timeline now that the parliamentarian has slightly changed the picture on the Senate side. Can you still get this done? Will the House be ready to catch a long ball if the Senate throws it out there, say Sunday night or Monday?
I think I'm optimistic. We have had a lot of deadlines that people were saying there's no way we're going to hit, and we've still met those, and that's happened this entire Congress. So I'm still optimistic we can hit that deadline. I know there's a lot of work out there, but I'm confident in the good work on the in the other chamber and what we can get done in the House.
Well, when we consider what's going on in the other chamber today, this decision or this advice from the parliamentarian that changes to the provider tax does not fall into what is eligible under reconciliation, is that a good thing or a bad thing in your mind, Congressman?
Well, it's unfortunate. There's a lot of stuff that has been, fallen by the wayside with these decisions with the parliamentarian, and I think there are, opportunities to, bring points of order, see what can be done on the Senate side, and I really hope that the senators come to a good resolution here. But I'll say I'm really disappointed in a lot of the stuff that's fallen off, and that's one of them. There's a lot of things that we worked really hard in getting consensus into getting really good policy. And the part that is the most frustrating about this is I think that, it wasn't perfect for everybody, but we got a really good product through the House, something that we can get passed in the House. And now that it's being kind of taken apart, or these parts are taken out, because it all works together, intricately. And so it's frustrating for us on the House side to see it going through this process, but I'm hoping that that the other chamber can, get to some consensus to get some of this stuff back in. And a lot of these are key components that we'll need to continue to have the support that we have had on the House.
Of course, you don't have a parliamentarian to deal with on the House side, Congressman, right? So you're speaking slightly different languages here, and I wonder how worried you are about what else we could hear from the parliamentarian if she has a problem, for instance, with the current policy baseline, the method of accounting that you were using in the House. That would be a game changer, would it not?
It would be a game changer, and it really comes down to the same thing I just said is we worked really hard. Leadership worked, the rank and file worked. We all worked really hard on getting some good policy together that all works together really well. I mean, we're looking at just how good this bill is in terms of the tax cuts, in terms of securing the border, of supporting our military, everything that's in there, making sure that we are protecting Medicaid for those who are actually entitled to it. There's so much good policy in here. And it is a little frustrating to see things happening over there, but I'm still optimistic that we're going to get some resolution there, that the Senate is going to work hard at getting this through so it still passes muster and we get a good product that we can pass quickly in the House.
At this point, Congressman, as you hear from your colleagues across the conference, are you more concerned that fiscal conservatives in the Freedom Caucus or the SALT Caucus could ultimately be ones that act as the greatest barrier to making sure this thing gets requisite votes?
Well, here's the thing, is they both have strong voices, and of course we all have to listen to both sides of that to get something through. And we got this through in the House by a 1-vote majority, so it's a fine line there of making sure that we are finding as best consensus as we can amongst these different parts of it. Everything, like you mentioned, from the Freedom Caucus's concerns, and a lot of those I share, to the concerns we have on the other side, and some of those I share. It's a very fine line that we got this through. Those voices are all meaningful because we can only, we can't lose that many votes and still get this passed. So we need to make sure that we are, finding not the perfect, but the good. And I think what we have right now is a really good bill. And if we can continue listening to both sides of this and understand that not everybody's going to get everything that they want, but this is a very important bill to the American people. It's a very important bill to my district in central and eastern Montana. And I do believe that we are going to find that consensus and get something that is a very strong bill through here.
When you talk to your colleagues from New York, New Jersey, and some of the other SALT states, or at least lawmakers with SALT districts, Congressman, what's the conversation like? You don't believe any of them would actually vote no and allow people's taxes to go up over the specific singular issue of SALT, do you?
Well, that's been a big conversation that I've heard bits and pieces, and a lot of the colleagues that I have on that side, I mean, they've been very strong in their convictions there. Whether they would do that or not, I got to tell you, I don't know. I'm not really comfortable putting them to the test because I don't know, and it's really important to me. It's really important to my constituents that we get these tax cuts and we get these spending cuts in.
All right, Congressman, we appreciate you joining us live from Capitol Hill. That's Republican Congressman Troy Downing, representing Montana's 2nd District, live with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thank you so much. Of course, we're going to be hearing more about this one big, beautiful bill later on this afternoon from the President of the United States himself, holding an event slated for 4 p.m. Eastern Time, dubbed the One Big, Beautiful Event. He's going to be trying hard to make the case for this legislation and everything he says it will do for Americans.
At least he's staying on brand with this. That's going to coincide with the closing bell, at least by the schedule here. Yep. He's going to be joined by what they're calling everyday Americans at the White House. This will be in the East Room. We're going to be hearing from a number of different workers, stakeholders, I guess, who could benefit from this bill. The president could also make some comments about Iran.
Yes.
And we're going to get into that coming up next with our panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us. You saw that news conference at the Pentagon this morning, huh?
Yeah, with the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth also watching the press conference from Caroline Leavitt, or the briefing rather. She says no talks are scheduled yet between the U.S. and Iran. We'll have more next here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
A lot of us started our days with eyes on the Pentagon. Pete Hegseth in a news conference alongside the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as announced by the President of the United States last evening. They got behind the podiums just around 8 a.m. with a room full of reporters. The Pentagon press corps was assembled for an update on the mission over Iran. And as the president put it, to defend the dignity of the pilots who flew the B-2 bombers and the other aircraft, not to mention the support crew that was part of that entire massive precision strike against Iran. We didn't learn a lot more about intelligence, although we did talk about it quite a bit. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs showed a video about this bunker-busting bomb, its capabilities. They had satellite photos of the Fordow site, for instance, in Iran that we attacked, but there wasn't new intelligence to share. The headline on the terminal says it all. Hegseth berates media as questions linger on Iran strike impact. The Secretary of Defense went out of his way to castigate reporters in the room. Listen.
Because you, and I mean specifically you, the press, specifically you, the press corps, because you cheer against Trump so hard, it's like in your DNA and in your blood to cheer against Trump, because you want him not to be successful so bad, you have to cheer against the efficacy of these strikes.
So let's play this now to our political panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are both with us, Bloomberg politics contributors. Rick, of course, partner at Stone Court Capital and Republican strategist. Jeannie, our Democratic analyst and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Rick, as we see the defense secretary quite literally calling out the press who was in the room for this press conference, what do you make of this strategy by the administration to undermine basically the news media and its coverage of this, rather than trying to iron out for sure first what we actually do and do not know about how effective these strikes actually were without having the intelligence in hand?
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't think it's anything new. I mean, we've all lived through the era during George W. Bush where the Secretary of Defense then, Don Rumsfeld, would berate the press on a daily basis, talk about, how they didn't understand what was going on, or that he had intelligence that they didn't have and he wasn't going to share it. And so this is nothing new in that regard. I would say it would do the press some good not to chase the speeding truck every time it leaves the garage. And then what I mean by that is there's a leak report. It's a draft report, and yet the press reported it as this is the conclusion. And we all know that they're still working on this thing. Today, the CIA came out and said Fedora was severely damaged, much more echoing the president's initial comments. We don't know where the president's getting his information, and we don't know the conclusions of this storyline when it comes to what is or isn't the future of the Iranian nuclear program. But you would think that it was a disaster, the attack that the U.S. put on Iran. And so I feel for the Secretary of Defense and his frustration. He can't control the media, but I think the media needs to learn to control itself a little bit, because it is almost borderline insulting to the military who risked their lives to do the attack to begin with. The last thing I would say about Secretary is he ought to quit calling the President of the United States Trump. He should call him the president. It's his boss. And if I kept repeating my last name of my boss over and over again, I think he would fire me. And I think that would be justified.
Wow. All right. A pretty interesting read from Rick, and a pretty even-handed one, Jeannie. I'm curious your thoughts on this, because, of course, blaming the media is the oldest trick in the book, and it's not something that we're unfamiliar with when it comes to this administration. Do we also need, however, to acknowledge the fact that the Pentagon press corps is a little bit different? These are specialized reporters in many cases who are not on TV every day, and they're not chasing every lead that comes out of the White House. Many have been there for 30 years or more, including our own Tony Capaccio, who is in the front row for that event today. Is it their job to question what's going on right now, Jeannie, or wait for a more complete assessment?
They are doing their job. I mean, this should be called out for what it is. It is distraction. And who better to get us distracted than the media that everybody likes to pound on? There was not one report that I saw, and I would love if somebody would share it with me, of anybody who reported on that assessment from the DIA, which said that this is the final word, this is it. Nobody said that. They said it was a preliminary assessment. And if they did say that, they're wrong and they can be called out on that. But this is all a distraction from the real issue, which when Pete Hegseth was asked about, he too sidestepped it, which is what happened to the enriched uranium and the centrifuges that were not at those three facilities that presumably survived the strikes. That means that Iran has the elements to reconstitute their nuclear program. When he was asked that by the crazy press, he didn't answer. And so that is what needs to be addressed. What is the state of the scientific community in Iran? Where does the knowledge lie to reconstitute this? Because you cannot bomb away that kind of knowledge. He sidestepped that all in his effort to do what this administration does, and quite frankly, a lot of administrations do, is to try to distract the public with nonsense. Go ahead, attack the press. They are doing their job, but give us the answers we deserve and need. And by the way, if the assessment is not ready, then just say that. But that's not what they've said. They have discounted the assessment they don't politically like in favor of one that is equally as preliminary, and that is the one the CIA wants. So they often conflict. That's pretty standard. We can wait for the assessments, but answer the question about the uranium and the state of reconstitution in Iran.
Well, the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, is in the process of answering questions from the press in the briefing room right now as we speak. And no surprise, Iran is featuring heavily in the questions from reporters. Some of the things we've heard from Caroline Leavitt include that no talks are yet scheduled with Iran, but the U.S. is on a diplomatic path with Iran, and that the goal of meeting with Iran would be to work towards a lasting peace. She also noted to the conversation we were just having that only tidbits of the Iran intelligence report were leaked to CNN and the New York Times. But Rick, on this idea of talks in particular, knowing the president in the Netherlands yesterday at the NATO summit said he doesn't think it's necessary to have a diplomatic deal with Iran. How do you see this actually moving forward? Is it actually necessary? Do you believe the president still wants to be able to say he made a deal with Tehran?
Yeah, I think that certainly the Republican senators, more hawkish guys I know, they want to see an agreement with Iran, and they want to see Iran agree to do no more processing of nuclear fuel, right? I mean, like they want an agreement that is verifiable by IAEA and other inspectors, and bypass this whole debate as to whether they could or couldn't do it, and get them to commit to not doing it. And if they commit to not doing it, then we can start doing things like taking off sanctions and looking at better diplomatic relations and all those things that we want to have. but it comes at a price. It comes at a price to, the Western societies who want fewer nuclear weapons running around the world. And so I think that initially the president's probably, first reaction of, hey, they can't make a weapon now. That may be technically true. But the real question Israel's going to ask, and people like Lindsey Graham and John Thune and others are going to say is, what can we do to tie up Iran so that this never becomes another issue where we have to get B-2 bombers over their airspace?
Mm-hmm. They're talking as well in the White House briefing about the sharing of intelligence with Congress and questions about limiting that information, Jeannie, something that we've talked about quite a bit this week. There was, in fact, a briefing scheduled for today with lawmakers, a Senate briefing that had been limited to just Pete Hegseth, we understand. Tulsi Gabbard, who testified in March, of course, that our intelligence agencies assessed that Iran was not building a nuclear weapon, notably absent from this briefing. What do you make of this turning of the screws on intel sharing with Congress?
Yeah, they've been talking a lot about this leak, and absolutely, if there is a leak and that leak is coming from wherever it's coming, it should be investigated and they should plug the hole. But that does not mean that they get to bypass the law, which says that they have to alert Congress and they have to brief them within 48 hours. And so I'm happy the briefing is occurring today. It should be a full throttle briefing. So it is concerning when people are kept out, but that's obviously the administration's decision to make. It is fascinating, by the way, that you have Donald Trump on the one hand saying that no talks are needed, but yet he cannot provide proof that the nuclear program is gone, because what would they do to ensure Iran will comply with this no rebuilding? I mean, that is the question that needs to be answered. And if you're not going to talk with them, how do you ensure that? And Congress has a right to know all of that. And so we are once again in a position where anybody who takes power in Iran going forward is going to say, we were hit because we didn't have nuclear weapons. The deterrent is nuclear. Let us go underground, AKA North Korea's model, and let us reconstitute. And the president, because he wants to say this was one and done, decades, and I solved the problem in 12 days or 12 hours or whatever he says, he doesn't want to deal with that very real, what would be a catastrophe for the West that Rick was just talking about. And that's what Congress deserves to know from our defense sector.
For what it's worth, today the reporting is that Pete Hegseth, is, along with Marco Rubio, John Ratcliffe, General Dan Kane, will be part of that briefing, just to be clear, and not Tulsi Gabbard. Last evening we spoke with Senator Tammy Duckworth, who suggested that Hegseth may alone be briefing them. Great conversation, and thanks to both of you. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors, with us here on Balance of Power, live from Washington, Thursday edition, alongside Kaylee Lyons. I'm Joe Matthew, as we turn to the cyber threat against the United States, but also the way this information is collected, Kaylee, and disseminated. We've got a real expert on this coming up.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts, or watch us live on YouTube.
Thank you for being with us on the Thursday edition, the early edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite channel 121, Bloomberg Originals, yes, YouTube as well. If you're not on YouTube right now, it's a good time to come on in. Search Bloomberg Business News Live, because we have something special for you here. Following the news conference this morning at the Pentagon with Pete Hegseth, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, of course, Secretary of Defense, castigating the media for getting the story wrong on Iran and not celebrating our men and women in uniform, there are still massive questions about the intelligence complex behind this claim that we destroyed Iran's nuclear program. We're going to get into that. Because Laura is a true expert, having helped to run the intelligence community. By the way, that's got a capital I and a capital C. I'll explain that in just a moment. But we want to zoom in first on the cyber threats, also part of Laura's specialty, against U.S. banks. This is something that came up in testimony this week that we brought you live on Bloomberg when Fed Chair Jay Powell went up to the House. Remember, he had 2 days of testimony this week, and of course, we focused on his commentary about inflation, interest rates, tariffs. But how about cyber threats from Iran against U.S. banks? This is a conversation with Congressman Gottheimer, who was questioning the Fed chair. Let's listen.
We're in touch with the other regulators and the parts of the government that work on cyber, as you know, and we're in touch with the banks to say, for people to be on the alert for things like that to happen, and also we're on the alert because we're a target as well. So you're right to raise it. It's a big issue.
Enter Laura Galante, now principal at West Exec Advisors, former, as I mentioned, cyber executive for the intelligence community. Yes, that's a capital I and a capital C. And just to explain, this is a coalition, as self-described, of 18 separate U.S. government agencies that analyze and disseminate intelligence. The intelligence community that you ran cyber for stitches all of this together into one composite, which we're still waiting for when it comes to Iran. And I want to ask you about that in a moment, Laura. Welcome back. It's really great to have you on Bloomberg.
Nice to be here, Joe.
To hear that out in the open in a congressional hearing, what is the Fed prepared for, and what threat are we facing, cyber threat from Iran?
Chairman Powell has been laying out cyber threats as a key issue for Wall Street for years. And with the Iranian activity, the bombs dropped on Saturday, we're definitely in a heightened environment in terms of what Iran's willing to do. Now, in terms of Wall Street and the threat to banks and the financial sector, they're always on alert. These are platinum security programs that the banks have. But where Iran is going to play is on the psychological, the influence operations, being really loud and taking credit for activity.
Okay.
So where the banks have to focus is, where's there going to be something disruptive, where an actor from Iran can claim that they've had an impact on Wall Street, on the financial sector, and the Iranian government will want to use that to their advantage at home and domestically.
Yeah. How much of this stuff do we never hear about because nobody wants to say openly that they've been attacked or hacked, and nobody wants to take credit for the attack to begin with?
Well, there's a couple pieces to disclosure.
Okay.
The banks in particular have a lot of regulators and are really incented and do a great job about communicating when they're threatened. There's other sectors, I'll give you water, for example, who don't have the same incentive structure to be able to detect and then be able to talk about the cyber attacks that are hitting them. And this is where Iranian activity could get really interesting and threatening over the next few months. Yeah, water sector, energy sector, even transportation. Where Iranian cyber actors have focused in the past is getting into the industrial control systems, sort of the tech interface that controls water levels, chlorine, water pumps, that sort of thing.
And planting
and disrupting
bugs
them.
that could be a problem much later, right?
Yeah, even turning them off. In other cases, they'll put up the equivalent of kind of digital graffiti, a note that says, Israel, to take down Israel, this device was made in Israel, Iran is here, really threatening, again, kind of a psychological effect. But different municipalities have had to take down their water systems as a result of this, just in the last couple of years. So,
is this Iran or China or both?
This is Iran in the case we're talking about now. China's got pre-positioned access at a pretty deep level across the energy sector.
What a thought. Pre-positioned access.
You know, Director Wray, the former FBI director, called them sleeper cells.
Yeah.
But essentially, they've got cyber access in networks that they could use at a time and place of their choosing. And the thought process for China, who's a real strategic actor here, and it's the Chinese military who's doing this, is use that strategic leverage to change how U.S. political will works. Will China be able to deter the U.S. from coming to Taiwan's aid or another ally in the Asia Pacific? And they're using those cyber accesses, they're lying in wait to use those if they need them.
Very scary. We're talking about a ceasefire with Iran, making a deal with Iran. We're going to sit down at the table next week. The missiles aren't flying, but these threats continue. Shouldn't this be part of a ceasefire agreement or a peace deal with Iran?
Iranian cyber activity has been happening in the last week. Albania has actually been the victim of some of this. They harbor a pro-Iranian group. So the actors here are on it. Now, the question in the next couple weeks, but even months, is what can Iran touch in terms of U.S. targets, U.S. critical infrastructure targets, and be able to tout the impact of that and potentially use that as a way to get more leverage in the ceasefire discussions and other negotiations that are going to be happening.
Amazing. This is exactly the conversation that I thought it might be, Laura, because we learn a lot when we talk to you. And I want to ask you about the debate that's going on surrounding the use of, the dissemination of, the politicization of intelligence in Washington at the moment. You saw the Defense Secretary, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs this morning, trying to stitch together a composite to back up claims that Iran's nuclear program has been obliterated, as the president puts it. We had an initial assessment that was apparently leaked to some news organizations, including the Washington Post, CNN, New York Times, suggesting that we set them back by only months. And I know that the president has been very angry about this in the Pentagon, at least as led by the civilian leadership of the Pentagon, suggesting that we've insulted the dignity of the pilots who flew this incredible mission that I think we all agree was quite impressive and might have revolutionized the way we do this. Talk to us about the process, because we're told it'll take weeks before we really know what happened. You were part of an organization that, in fact, oversaw 18 different agencies. How many are working on this? How long will it take to have a real answer?
Putting together a damage assessment, especially when it's complex, is what we're seeing after Saturday. Multiple targets, multiple different ways to read how that destruction happened against those targets. This is going to take time. And one of the things that folks in the intelligence community are going to be incredibly diligent about is making sure that they're taking a variety of sources. Some of that sourcing will come from allies. Some of that sourcing will come from reports on the ground. It'll come from a myriad of sources. And they need to take that into account to really understand what the damage looks like. So these first preliminary days, it's wild that this is playing out in the public sphere. The debates around how to gauge this damage and how to convey that and how to explain it is where these 18 agencies are going to be having really fruitful discussions and then putting that together for the president in a variety of intelligence products. That's going to be the key work here. And it's tough when you have Pentagon leadership, when you have DOD coming out in saying some of this, but one of the lines that Kane said that I think is worth seizing on is DOD doesn't grade its own homework, the intelligence community does the damage assessment. And that's a really key point here. So let the intelligence community really get down to it and understand what's happened.
Well, once again, it is really the civilian leadership that's taking this stand, right? We haven't heard official Pentagon, beginning with the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, say exactly what the president has said. I don't want to pull you into a political conversation here, but it is remarkable, and I'm guessing your phone's been blowing up with a lot of folks from the intel community. Remarkable to see this administration, and specifically this president, having denigrated the intelligence community for many years, now turning to it for support to back up this argument.
The intelligence community's strength at its core, and you have so many professionals in there who've really dedicated their time and service to an unbiased approach to the facts. And what they're really going to focus on here is not being politicized and getting straight down to here's what we know has happened, here's what we don't know, and then using what we call confidence language, caveats, a way to explain that room. And political leadership, and it is remarkable to see Trump, so involved in the discussions with intelligence community assessments right now when he wrote them off so much in the first administration. But this is the work. And this is the moment when everybody should really be looking to the intelligence community to understand the picture. And that picture has to inform our actions. If we lose that and politicize that, that's when we're really not going to have a clear understanding of what's going on. And that will not be good for the U.S.
Are these leaks politically motivated when you hear about an initial assessment from a single agency knocking around certain quarters of the news media? Does that bother you?
I can't say. Leaks are always bothersome on classified intelligence, to put it mildly, right? This shouldn't be out there. The question is, can these agencies get the space that they deserve to have the debates internally?
Without me seeing it first.
Right. Yeah. This isn't something that makes any sense. And in fact, it's really antithetical to national security to be having these intelligence debates on the outside. You want to give professionals the space to really bat around the facts, bat around different sources, and get to a conclusion that they agree on.
Yeah. In our remaining moment here, does this go public when there's a final product? Or is this something that we'll only hear about years later?
That's going to be up to the decision makers in the intelligence community on what's releasable and what needs to stay within channels. And a lot of that's about protecting sources. It's about a long-term view on American intelligence and what we preserve and what makes sense to put out publicly. So we'll have to wait and see.
Is there an initial, just to add on to that, an initial reading that's used internally by the Pentagon, for instance, to decide if they need to go back in, hit it again?
There's going to be a variety of intelligence products that are created over time that different policymakers in the Pentagon and elsewhere will rely upon. But this is going to be a really dynamic and important focus across the agencies.
Yeah. We've got to do this again. Stay close to us while we figure this out. It's really great to have you back. I told you this would be an important conversation with Laura Galante, and there you have it. Where else are you going to hear a conversation like that but here this hour on Bloomberg? Principal West Exec Advisors, former cyber executive for the intelligence community. Google that, the intelligence community, capital I, capital C. You might learn something while you're at it. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.